Appearances are often a cloak, woven not to hide who you are, but to test the character of those who only see the cloth. In the quiet, manicured streets of Maple Creek, a suburb where conformity was a currency and every lawn was a testament to its owner's standing, Elias Vance was a man without value. His house, a small, unassuming bungalow with paint that had begun to peel, and a garden that grew with a wildness the neighbors called neglect, stood as a quiet defiance to the neighborhood's polished perfection. It was a smudge on a pristine painting, and for that, Elias was the subject of whispers and thinly veiled scorn. His neighbors, particularly the Petersons who lived in the immaculate two-story house directly across the street, watched his comings and goings with a mixture of pity and contempt. They saw a broken man, a failure who shuffled through life, his eyes fixed on the pavement as if the weight of his past was too heavy to allow him to look up. They would laugh quietly to themselves as he tended to his unruly garden, seeing his solitude as proof of his defeat. But they never saw the fire that smoldered deep within his gaze, a patient, calculating flame hidden beneath a layer of ash. The afternoon sun of a quiet Tuesday was casting long shadows across the perfectly trimmed hedges when the rhythm of Maple Creek was broken. A car, unlike any that had ever graced its streets, turned onto the lane. It was a sedan, but to call it just a car would be an understatement. It was a shard of midnight, impossibly black and polished to a mirror finish, gliding over the asphalt with a silence that was more commanding than any engine's roar. It moved with the predatory grace of a panther, and it came to a stop directly in front of Elias Vance's humble home. The neighborhood seemed to hold its breath. Across the street, Karen Peterson, who had been watering her prize-winning roses, slowly lowered her hose, her mouth slightly agape. Her husband, Mark, lowered his newspaper, his eyes wide with disbelief. This was a vehicle for billionaires, for men who moved markets and shaped destinies, not for the broken man in the peeling bungalow. Just as the whispers were about to start, the front door of the small house opened. Elias stepped out, not with the shuffle they were used to, but with a straight back and a steady gait. He showed no surprise, no awe. He simply waited. The rear door of the sedan opened, and a man in a tailored suit, sharp and severe, emerged. He held a leather briefcase and moved with an air of immense authority. He walked up the cracked pathway to Elias, nodded once with profound respect, and followed him inside. The door closed with a quiet click, but for the Petersons, it sounded like a thunderclap. The laughter had died on their lips, replaced by a cold, unsettling feeling. The man they had mocked, the failure they had scorned, was not who they thought he was. And they suddenly had the terrifying realization that they were not just observers of his story, but perhaps minor characters in a drama far grander and more dangerous than they could have ever imagined. The game had just been set, and the board was the entire, unsuspecting world they thought they knew. To understand the quiet man in the small house, you must first understand the king he once was, and the kingdom he built from nothing but sparks of genius and relentless will. 5 years before the silent, black car ever disturbed the peace of Maple Creek, Elias Vance was a name spoken with a kind of reverence in the worlds of technology and finance. He was not a man who inherited a throne. He was a man who built one, brick by digital brick, in the heart of a city that bowed to innovation. His office, on the top floor of the gleaming Vance Innovations Tower, was less a room and more a window to the world he had shaped. From there, the city sprawled below like a circuit board, a complex network of lights and lives, and Elias saw it not with the eyes of a conqueror, but with the curiosity of a creator. He was a titan, but a gentle one. His suits were tailored, his handshake was firm, but his eyes, the same eyes that now studied the weeds in his garden, held a perpetual light of inquiry, a constant search for the next solution, the next breakthrough that could genuinely better people's lives. Vance Innovations was born in a cramped garage, fueled by lukewarm coffee and the unwavering belief that technology should be a bridge, not a barrier. Now, it was a global behemoth, its logo a symbol of elegant, intuitive design and uncompromising quality. Elias had poured his very soul into its foundations, fostering a culture of creativity and respect that was the envy of the industry. He knew the names of his lead engineers, the security guard at the front desk, the woman who ran the cafeteria. He remembered their children's names, asked about their vacations. He believed that a company was a family, a complex ecosystem where every part was vital. It was this belief, this profound and perhaps naive trust in the goodness of people, that would become his fatal flaw. His queen, in this glittering kingdom, was Isabella. When they first met, she had been a captivating art history student, drawn to the fierce intelligence and quiet passion that burned within the young, struggling Elias. She loved the dreamer in him, the man who spoke of changing the world. But as the dreams became reality, and the reality became unimaginable wealth, the woman she was slowly gave way to the woman she could afford to be. Isabella blossomed in the limelight. She was the perfect corporate wife, effortlessly elegant, her smile gracing the pages of society magazines. She chaired charity galas, curated art collections, and hosted dinners where deals worth millions were struck over dessert. She loved the world Elias had given her, but somewhere along the way, she had fallen out of love with the man who built it. His long nights at the lab, which she once saw as romantic dedication, became a personal affront, a sign that his work was more important than her. His simple tastes, his preference for a quiet evening at home over a flamboyant party, became an embarrassment. She began to see his humility not as a virtue, but as a lack of ambition to truly own their status. She wanted a king who reveled in his power, not one who still thought like the inventor in the garage. Their son, Leo, was the crown prince of this empire, but the crown was a heavy and ill-fitting one. To be the son of Elias Vance was to live in a perpetual shadow. Leo was a good, gentle boy, but he did not possess his father's visionary intellect or his relentless drive. He saw the world in simpler terms, and in the grand, complex blueprint of his father's life, he struggled to find a place for himself. Elias, in his own way, loved his son deeply, but his language of affection was often spoken through the lens of logic and innovation. He would try to connect with Leo about quantum computing or neural networks, not understanding that the boy simply wanted to talk about a movie he'd seen or the girl he liked at school. This created a chasm between them, a space of misunderstanding that Leo filled with feelings of inadequacy. He yearned for his father's approval, but felt he could never achieve it. He craved the warmth of his mother's affection, but soon learned it was conditional, often granted only when he mirrored her own sophisticated tastes and social ambitions. He was adrift, a lonely boy in a palace of glass and steel, making him tragically vulnerable to any voice that offered him the validation he so desperately sought. And then there was Marcus Thorne. If Elias was the architect of the kingdom, Marcus was the man he had personally chosen and trained to be its staunchest defender. Elias had found Marcus years ago, a brilliant but raw programmer from a broken home, full of anger and ambition. He saw a reflection of his own younger self in Marcus, a hunger to prove his worth. Elias took him under his wing, mentored him, and treated him not as an employee, but as the younger brother he never had. He gave Marcus his complete trust, promoting him through the ranks until he was the chief operating officer, his undisputed second in command. Marcus was charming, intelligent, and fiercely loyal on the surface. He mastered the language of devotion, always being the first to praise Elias in public, the one who worked the latest, the one who seemed to share the founder's vision with near telepathic synergy. But behind the adoring gaze, a dark and insidious envy had taken root and festered for years. He saw Elias's genius not with admiration, but with resentment. He saw the love and respect Elias commanded from his employees and coveted it. He saw the effortless power Elias wielded and believed, in the deepest recesses of his soul, that he deserved it more. He believed Elias was soft, his ethical approach to business, a weakness. Marcus didn't just want the kingdom. He wanted to erase the legacy of the king who built it. He watched the growing distance between Elias and Isabella. He saw the insecurity in Leo, and he realized he was not just a defender of the castle. He was a serpent who had already slipped inside its walls, patiently waiting for the perfect moment to strike. This was the family, the kingdom, that stood 5 years ago. A visionary king, a disenchanted queen, a lost prince, and a trusted knight whose armor concealed a traitor's heart. They were on top of the world, a perfect picture of success, completely unaware that the foundations of their gilded life were already turning to sand. The gilded cage, no matter how beautiful, is still a cage. The first cracks in the Vance family's perfect facade did not appear with a dramatic shatter, but as fine, almost invisible lines in the crystal. They were the silences that stretched a little too long over the marble dinner table, the way Isabella's smile didn't quite reach her eyes when she looked at her husband, the subtle but constant tension in Leo's shoulders whenever his father entered a room. The sprawling mansion, once a symbol of their shared success, began to feel like a museum of a life they no longer lived together. Each of them moved through its vast, ornate halls like ghosts, occupying the same space but existing in different worlds. The disconnect often crystallized during the rituals of their public life. One evening, as they prepared for the annual Innovators Gala, the chill between them was palpable. Elias stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of their bedroom, a tablet in his hand, his mind a universe away, wrestling with a complex algorithm. He was dressed in his tuxedo, but his focus was entirely on the glowing screen. Isabella sat at her vanity, a masterpiece of diamonds and silk, putting the final touches on an appearance that had taken hours to perfect. "Must you bring that thing with you everywhere?" she said, her voice cool and sharp. "It's the one night a year we're supposed to celebrate us, Elias. Not your latest project." Elias looked up, his focus slowly returning to the room. "This is important, Izzy. We're on the verge of a breakthrough in predictive modeling. This could change everything." He said it with the genuine excitement of a boy with a new invention, but Isabella heard only what he wasn't saying. "And what about us?" she countered, turning to face him. "Is there an algorithm for that? A problem you can solve in your lab? Because out here, in the real world, your wife is trying to have a conversation with you." The argument that followed was a familiar, tired dance. He spoke of legacy, of changing the world. She spoke of presence, of feeling like a ghost in her own life. He saw her need for social events as frivolous. She saw his obsession with work as a rejection. They were speaking different languages, their love lost in a translation of ambition and resentment. Into this growing void stepped two very different, but equally calculating, forces. The first was Isabella's mother, Eleanor. She was a woman carved from ice, believing that sentiment was a luxury and marriage was an acquisition. During her frequent visits, she would survey the mansion not with maternal pride, but with the keen eye of an appraiser. Over tea in the sunroom, she would plant her insidious seeds. "He's a brilliant man, darling. No one denies that," she would begin, her voice deceptively soft. "But brilliant men are often fools in matters of the heart and in matters of finance. Have you seen the company's charter? Do you understand your position if, heaven forbid, something were to happen? He's pouring millions into these speculative projects. A man who loves his family ensures their security first. His love is for the idea, Isabella. Your love must be for yourself and for Leo." Eleanor wasn't just suggesting suspicion, she was teaching a strategy. She framed selfishness as self-preservation, convincing Isabella that her growing discontent was not just an emotional response, but a sound financial concern. She made Isabella feel that in order to protect herself, she had to view her husband not as a partner, but as a variable in an equation of power and wealth. The second force was Marcus Thorne, and he was far more dangerous. He had been watching the decay of the Vance marriage with the patience of a predator. He understood something about Isabella that Elias had long forgotten. She needed to be seen. Her identity had become so entwined with being Mrs. Vance that she had forgotten who Isabella was, and she was desperate for someone to remind her. Marcus began his campaign not with overt seduction, but with calculated empathy. He would find her alone in the garden after a tense dinner or in the gallery wing of the house, and he would simply listen. He became the sole audience for her frustrations, validating every complaint, nodding with a somber understanding that made her feel, for the first time in years, completely justified in her unhappiness. "He's a genius," Marcus would say, echoing Eleanor's words but with a different spin. But geniuses live on a different planet. They don't see the stars around them because they're too busy trying to map the universe. "He doesn't see you, Isabella. Not really. And that is a crime." He painted himself as the one who truly appreciated her, complimenting her taste in art, her strategic mind for organizing social events, her grace under pressure. While Elias was building a legacy, Marcus was building a bridge directly to Isabella's neglected heart. Their affair began not in a bedroom, but in these stolen conversations, in shared glances of understanding across a crowded room. He made her a co-conspirator in her own life, framing their secret connection as a sanctuary from the cold world of her husband's genius. Leo, meanwhile, became the key pawn in their unfolding game. He was the emotional leverage they needed, and his teenage insecurities were tragically easy to exploit. Isabella began to confide in him, pulling him into her circle of misery under the guise of maternal closeness. "Your father puts so much pressure on us to be perfect," she would sigh, stroking his hair. "He just doesn't understand that we can't all be like him. It's a burden, isn't it?" She created a secret alliance, a shared sense of being misunderstood by the great Elias Vance. At the same time, Marcus stepped into the role of the mentor and friend that Leo desperately wanted his father to be. He took Leo to basketball games, talked to him about cars, listened to his dreams of starting a band. He offered praise without the weight of expectation that always seemed to come with his father's attention. Then, he would carefully, subtly, twist the knife. When Leo pitched a marketing idea to Elias, who, with his typical analytical approach, pointed out its flaws, Leo was left feeling crushed. Later that day, Marcus would put a hand on his shoulder and say, "Hey, I heard about your idea. It was brilliant. A little ahead of its time, maybe. Your dad? He's a visionary with technology, but he's old school when it comes to people. He doesn't see the passion, but I do." In that moment, Marcus became Leo's champion, and Elias became the out-of-touch obstacle. They were poisoning the well, not with lies, but with twisted truths, reframing Elias's paternal guidance as rigid control, his focus as neglect, and his love as pressure. The cracks were no longer fine lines, they were gaping fissures, and the entire foundation of the Vance family was beginning to crumble from within, all while the king of the castle remained completely, blissfully unaware. The plan, when it was finally executed, was a masterpiece of cold, calculated cruelty. It unfolded not with a single violent blow, but with the quiet, inexorable precision of a master chess player, checkmating an unsuspecting opponent. For weeks, Marcus had worked in the shadows, using the absolute trust Elias had placed in him as his most potent weapon. With his COO-level access, he moved through the company's digital infrastructure like a ghost, weaving a web of damning, fabricated evidence. He created ghost invoices from shell corporations, rerouted funds for a top-secret research project into an account that looked suspiciously personal, and even doctored email chains, subtly altering words and dates to paint a picture of a CEO spiraling into corruption. He took Elias's greatest strengths, his visionary foresight, his willingness to invest in high-risk, high-reward projects, and expertly twisted them into evidence of recklessness and deceit. He was not just framing a man, he was meticulously dismantling a legacy using the very tools Elias had given him. The day of the betrayal began like any other. Elias woke before dawn, his mind already alight with ideas. He kissed a sleeping Isabella on the cheek, a gesture of habit that received no response, and left for the office, feeling the familiar thrum of excitement for the quarterly board meeting. He intended to unveil his plans for the predictive modeling engine, the project he believed would secure Vance Innovation's dominance for the next decade. He walked into the boardroom on the top floor, the room that had witnessed his greatest triumphs, with a confident smile, but the smile faltered and died. The atmosphere was not one of anticipation, it was thick with a funereal gloom. The board members, men and women he had known for years, sat stiffly in their chairs, their faces grim masks, their eyes refusing to meet his. At the far end of the table sat Isabella, her expression a careful study of sorrow, and next to her, looking pale and sick, was his son, Leo. Elias felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. This wasn't a board meeting, it was an ambush. Marcus stood, his demeanor somber, his voice laced with a performer's regret. "Elias," he began, his voice echoing in the tense silence. "This is, without a doubt, the most difficult day of my professional life. He then turned to the large screen behind him, and Elias's world began to unravel. On the screen, a presentation appeared, its title stark and brutal: Internal Financial Misconduct Investigation. For the next 30 minutes, Marcus laid out his case. He presented flow charts of laundered money, highlighted email excerpts taken out of context, and detailed the secret Project Chimera, framing it not as a revolutionary innovation, but as Elias's personal slush fund. He spoke of offshore accounts and clandestine meetings, a narrative so detailed, so plausible, that even Elias felt a moment of dizzying disorientation, as if he were watching a film about a stranger who happened to look like him. He tried to interject, to explain that Project Chimera was the future of the company, its secrecy essential to protect it from competitors, but the board chairman held up a hand, his face unreadable. "Let him finish, Elias." When the technical assassination was complete, Marcus played his trump card. He turned to Isabella, his eyes full of feigned sympathy. "Isabella, I know how painful this is, but the board needs to hear from you." She took a shuddering breath, a single, perfect tear tracing a path down her cheek. I didn't want to believe it," she began, her voice trembling. "But for months, Elias has been different, secretive. There were late-night phone calls he wouldn't explain, large withdrawals from our personal accounts. He said it was for the company, but he became so angry, so paranoid when I asked questions. She was a virtuoso of deceit, her performance so compelling that it solidified the board's worst fears. She was the grieving wife, forced to choose between her loyalty and the truth, and her pain seemed to legitimize every lie Marcus had told. Elias watched her, his heart turning to stone. This was the woman he had built an empire for, and she was dismantling it with a well-rehearsed fiction. But the final, fatal blow came not from his friend or his wife, it came from his son. Marcus placed a single, leather-bound folder on the table. "There is one final piece of evidence," he said, his voice low. "It is a sworn affidavit." He opened it and slid it down the polished surface of the table until it stopped directly in front of Elias. It was a single sheet of paper. Elias's eyes scanned the typed words, a fabricated account of him meeting with a corporate rival, handing over a briefcase. It was absurd, a lie so blatant he almost laughed. And then he saw the bottom of the page. He saw the signature. It was Leo's. The familiar, slightly clumsy scrawl of his own son's name, a signature he had watched evolve from a child's uncertain printing to a young man's confident script. In that instant, the boardroom, the accusations, the billions of dollars, all of it faded into an insignificant haze. All he could see was that signature. It was a dagger, forged by his own blood, and it was being plunged directly into his heart. He slowly lifted his gaze from the paper to his son. He searched Leo's eyes, begging for a sign, a flicker of defiance, anything to indicate this was a terrible mistake. But Leo couldn't look at him. He just stared at his hands, his body trembling, a prisoner of a betrayal he had been too weak to refuse. Elias was no longer a CEO fighting for his company. He was a father witnessing the death of his son's soul. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. What could he say? How do you defend yourself when your own family is the prosecution, the judge, and the jury? The vote was a formality, a series of grim, reluctant ayes that echoed like nails being hammered into his coffin. The chairman cleared his throat. "Elias Vance, you are hereby removed from your position as CEO and chairman of the board of Vance Innovations, effective immediately. Security will escort you from the premises." And just like that, the king was dethroned. The men he had trusted condemned him, the woman he had loved betrayed him, and the son he had raised destroyed him. He was no longer Elias Vance, the visionary. He was a ghost, cast out of his own kingdom by the people he had built it for. The fall was not a single, terrifying plunge. It was a brutal, grinding descent into an abyss. In the hours and days that followed the boardroom execution, Elias learned the true meaning of being utterly alone. The name that had once opened any door in the city was now a stain, splattered across the headlines of every newspaper and financial news channel. "Vance ousted amidst fraud allegations," they screamed. The Titans tumble. Marcus, in his first act as the new CEO, gave a masterful performance to the press. He spoke of a painful but necessary decision to preserve the integrity of the company, his face a mask of sorrow for his fallen mentor. He was the hero of the story, the reluctant Brutus saving Rome from a corrupt Caesar. The world, which only days before had celebrated Elias's genius, now consumed the narrative of his villainy with ravenous appetite. The public humiliation was swift and total. Employees he had mentored for years now averted their gazes in the street. Colleagues stopped returning his calls. He was a leper overnight, his legacy rewritten by the very people he had elevated. The legal and financial machinery that ground him down was mercilessly efficient. With his assets frozen pending the investigation, he was rendered powerless. His lawyers, faced with a mountain of meticulously crafted lies and the public testimony of his own wife, could offer little more than condolences. Isabella's divorce petition arrived via a cold, impersonal courier. There were no final conversations, no moments of closure. It was a transaction, a swift and brutal severing. She took the mansion, the art collection, the cars, the liquid assets her lawyers could pry loose. She took the entire, glittering shell of the life they had built, leaving him with nothing but the memories, which now felt like shards of glass in his mind. His last visit to the house was to collect a few personal belongings under the watchful eye of a security guard Isabella had hired. He walked through the silent marble halls, a stranger in his own home. He passed the grand family portrait in the foyer, the three of them, smiling in a past that now seemed like a cruel fiction and felt nothing but a vast, hollow ache. He was not just losing a house, he was being surgically removed from his own history. With the last of his accessible funds, a small emergency account that Marcus had somehow overlooked, Elias vanished. He drove for hours with no destination, the gleaming city he had helped build shrinking in his rearview mirror until it was just a memory. He needed anonymity, a place so removed from his former life that its very existence was an insult to the man he had been. He found it in Maple Creek. The bungalow was small, neglected, and suffocatingly ordinary. It was perfect. He bought it with cash, a ghost paying for his own tomb. The transition was a physical shock. After years of living in spaces designed to inspire awe, the low ceilings and cramped rooms felt like they were pressing in on him, stealing the very air from his lungs. The silence was the worst part. His life had been a symphony of noise, the constant ringing of phones, the hum of servers, the vibrant cacophony of brilliant minds debating, creating, building. Now, the only sound was the creak of the floorboards and the frantic, desperate pounding of his own heart. For weeks, he barely existed. He didn't unpack. He slept on the floor, because the thought of assembling a bed felt like an admission that this was his life now. Days bled into one another in a gray, featureless fog of grief. He was haunted. He would close his eyes and see Marcus's look of feigned regret, hear Isabella's trembling, deceitful voice, and feel the phantom pain of seeing Leo's signature on that single, life-destroying piece of paper. He would sit in the dark for hours, replaying every conversation, every decision, searching for the moment he had missed, the sign he had ignored. How could he have been so blind? The trust he had given so freely now seemed like a form of madness. His genius, his ability to see the future of technology, had left him utterly blind to the darkness coiled in the hearts of those closest to him. He was a man without a purpose, an inventor with nothing left to build, a father with no family. And then there were the neighbors, the Petersons. From his dusty front window, Elias had a perfect view of their home, a pristine, two-story symbol of the suburban dream. It was a constant, mocking reminder of everything he had lost. They were, of course, Marcus's cousins, a fact Elias discovered from a piece of misdelivered mail. They were his wardens, placed there to watch his decay and report back to the new king. Their cruelty was of the mundane, suburban variety, which made it all the more grating. Karen Peterson would offer him saccharine smiles that never reached her cold, calculating eyes. "Oh, you poor dear," she'd say, looking at his overgrown lawn. "It must be so difficult, starting over." Her husband, Mark, was more direct, his smugness, a physical presence. He'd make loud comments to his wife while washing his car, just loud enough for Elias to hear. "Guess not everyone is cut out for the big leagues, huh?" They were vultures, circling his slow demise, their whispers and laughter the soundtrack to his exile. They were a living testament to his fall, ensuring that even in his solitude, he would not be allowed to forget what had been taken from him. One evening, as the sun set, Elias stood at his window and watched them hosting a barbecue in their perfectly manicured backyard. The sound of their cheerful voices and laughter drifted across the street, an impenetrable wall of sound. He was an island, a castaway, and in that moment, staring out at the life he was forever barred from, he finally hit the cold, hard bottom of the abyss. He had nothing left to lose because everything had already been taken. For a man who has fallen into the abyss, the bottom is a place of strange and terrible clarity. The fog of shock and grief that had shrouded Elias for months began to recede, burned away not by a returning hope, but by the cold, hard ground of reality. He realized, in a moment of chilling lucidity while staring at his own gaunt reflection in a grimy window pane, that his despair was a victory for them. Every day he spent wallowing in his own misery. He was fulfilling their narrative of the broken man. Every moment of inaction was a tacit agreement to the lies they had built upon his ruins. Marcus, Isabella, Leo. They didn't just want his company, they wanted his surrender. They wanted him to fade into nothing, a forgotten footnote in their story of triumph. And in that realization, something shifted deep within him. The raw, bleeding wound of betrayal began to scar over, hardening into something new. It was not the hot, impulsive rage that demands immediate revenge, but something far more dangerous, a cold, patient, and absolute resolve. He would not seek vengeance. Vengeance was a messy, emotional act. He would seek justice. Justice was a structure, an equation. It was a truth that needed to be engineered, and for the first time in a long time, Elias remembered that he was the best engineer in the world. The first step was an act of archaeology, digging into the ruins of his own life. He finally opened the few boxes of personal effects he had taken from the mansion, the last artifacts of his former self. He sifted through old photographs, books, and mementos, each one a small, sharp pain. But at the bottom of the last box, beneath a framed photo of a younger, happier Leo, was a thick binder. It was filled with his own handwritten notes and schematics from the initial design phase of Vance Innovations' proprietary financial and security software. He had kept it out of pure sentimentality. He spread the pages on the dusty floor, the complex diagrams and lines of code, a language he hadn't spoken in what felt like a lifetime. He wasn't looking for anything, merely touching the last remnants of his creation. But as his fingers traced the intricate architecture of the system, his mind, almost on its own, began to work. He recalled the presentation Marcus had given, the damning evidence, and then he saw it. It was a detail so infinitesimally small, so buried in the technical minutiae, that no one else on that board could have ever noticed. A transaction ID in one of Marcus's fabricated logs used a 7-digit alphanumeric sequence. But Elias remembered, with the absolute certainty of a creator, that he had personally overseen a system-wide patch 18 months prior that made all such IDs 8 digits to accommodate international expansion. The ID Marcus had displayed was from an obsolete format. It was a forgery, a single, stupid, arrogant mistake. And it was the first thread. In the silent, dusty room, a slow, cold fire began to burn in Elias's eyes. The lie was not perfect, and he would unravel it, one thread at a time. This single inconsistency was the spark that reignited his world. The inventor's mind, which had lain dormant and grieving, roared back to life. He now had a project, the most important of his life. He was no longer building a product. He was building a case. The rundown bungalow, his tomb, began its transformation into his sanctuary and his command center. He sold the one thing of value he had left, an expensive watch Isabella had given him years ago, its sentimental value now a bitter poison, and used the cash to buy used, powerful computer components online. He paid in cryptocurrency, routing the purchases through a dozen anonymous nodes. To the outside world, the house remained a symbol of neglect. Inside, the back bedroom became a web of wires, servers, and monitors. He covered the windows with blackout curtains, soundproofed the walls with cheap foam paneling, and established a secure, untraceable network that piggybacked off a dozen different signals. The contrast was stark: a peeling, forgotten exterior hiding a nerve center of immense technological power. It was the perfect camouflage. He began to lead a meticulous double life. By day, he was the ghost of Maple Creek. He let his beard grow, wore worn-out clothes, and adopted a defeated slump. He took on odd jobs for cash, mowing lawns, cleaning gutters, fixing his neighbor's faulty Wi-Fi. He embraced the role of the harmless failure because it made him invisible, and invisible people hear everything. He would be weeding Karen Peterson's flower bed while she stood on her porch, speaking loudly on her phone about Marcus's stress over a new acquisition, unknowingly dropping the name of the holding company involved. He would fix another neighbor's computer and, while running diagnostics, notice an email chain discussing the sudden, lavish lifestyle of a former Vance Innovations board member who had been a swing vote in his ousting. He was a quiet sponge, absorbing every careless word, every piece of gossip, every scrap of data the complacent world of his enemies offered up. His humility was no longer a sign of defeat. It was his most effective weapon. But when the sun went down and the lights in Maple Creek winked out one by one, the ghost would vanish and the hunter would emerge. In the blue glow of his monitors, Elias was no longer a broken gardener. He was a predator, stalking his own digital kingdom. With his intimate, architect-level knowledge of Vance Innovation systems, he didn't need to smash through firewalls. He knew where the secret doors were. He found the digital fingerprints Marcus had tried so hard to erase. He followed the money, a complex river of transactions that flowed from the company through the holding company Karen Peterson had named, and finally into an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. An account held in the name of one Eleanor DeWitt, Isabella's mother. He resurrected deleted email archives, piecing together the timeline of the conspiracy, revealing the secret trips Marcus and Isabella had taken together months before his downfall. He was a phantom in their machine, moving silently through their private data, and they never even felt the breeze. One night, deep in the server archives, he found it. The original, unaltered financial report for Project Chimera. He ran a comparison with the version Marcus had presented to the board. The differences were stark, brutal, and undeniable. He printed the two documents, laying them side by side on his desk. In the faint light, a smile touched his lips for the first time in nearly a year. It was not a smile of joy. It was the grim, satisfied smile of a master craftsman who, having found a single flaw in his enemy's fortress, now knew exactly how to bring the entire structure crashing down. The evidence was a sword. It was sharp, it was true, and it was deadly. But Elias knew that a man with a sword standing alone against a fortified castle is not a warrior, he is a fool. He had the truth, but Marcus had the power. Marcus had the narrative, the board of directors in his pocket, and a war chest of corporate funds he could use to bury Elias in a legal avalanche. If Elias went to the press or the authorities now, Marcus would paint him as a bitter, unstable man obsessed with revenge, his meticulously gathered evidence dismissed as the high-tech forgeries of a disgraced genius. He could win the battle of facts and still lose the war of perception. To storm the castle, he needed an army. Or, at the very least, a king powerful enough to command one. And in the entire world, he could think of only one such man, Alistair Finch. The name itself was a legend, a whisper in the gilded halls of power. Finch was the ghost of Wall Street, a reclusive, enigmatic billionaire who had built a global empire so vast and diversified that no one was entirely sure where it began or ended. He was a digital phantom, leaving no public trace, his photograph never appearing in the press. He was known for two things: his almost supernatural ability to predict market trends and his absolute, unyielding contempt for corporate treachery. And Elias had met him once. The memory was a decade old, but was seared into his mind. Vance Innovations was still a rising star, and Elias, still in his early 30s, had a reputation as a cybersecurity prodigy. A crisis had erupted within Finch's monolithic conglomerate, Finch Global. A new, unknown form of malware was tearing through their unbreachable network, bringing their entire global logistics system to a grinding halt, costing them millions by the hour. Their own world-class security teams were stumped. Through a discreet, third-party recommendation, Elias was summoned. He was led not to an office, but to a subterranean command center, a room humming with the low thrum of servers and high-strung tension. He remembered Alistair Finch, not as a man who spoke, but as a presence who observed. Finch stood in the corner, a tall, imposing silhouette, watching everything with eyes that seemed to analyze the very air in the room. While his team panicked, Elias had been calm. He sat at a terminal, his fingers flying across the keyboard, and for 2 hours, he simply listened to the rhythm of the code. He found the flaw an elegant, beautiful, and utterly malicious piece of programming that had hidden itself in the system's own diagnostic protocols. He didn't just quarantine the threat, he dissected it, reversed it, and used its own logic to inoculate the entire network. In 6 hours, the crisis was over. In the quiet aftermath, Finch had approached him. He slid a piece of paper across the table. It was a check, and the signature line was the only thing filled in. "Write whatever number you feel is appropriate," Finch had said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. Elias had looked at the check, then at the formidable man before him, and slid it back. "My company is not for hire, Mr. Finch," Elias had replied. "We are partners with those we work with. The challenge of solving your problem was its own reward, but if you insist on repaying me, just do one thing. Remember my name." Elias saw a flicker of something in the old billionaire's eyes: surprise, perhaps even respect. Finch had simply nodded, pocketed the check, and said, "I will." Now, a decade later, Elias was about to find out if that promise was still valid. Contacting Finch was a monumental challenge. The man had built a fortress of digital anonymity around himself. Elias spent 3 days and nights in a caffeine-fueled trance, not trying to breach the fortress, but to find a key. He analyzed the architecture of Finch's private satellite network, the same one he had saved years ago. He found what he was looking for: a tiny, encrypted maintenance channel used for diagnostic updates, a digital service entrance so obscure it was almost certainly overlooked. He then crafted his message, a data packet so small and perfectly formed it would register not as an intrusion, but as a system query. The message itself was a work of art, a communication designed to appeal to a mind like Finch's. The subject was a simple phrase: regarding a debt of integrity. The body contained only 2 lines. The first was the warning: the fox has entered the henhouse, and he is wearing the shepherd's fleece, Vance Innovations. The second line was not words, but a string of code, the unique, elegant signature of the kill switch program he had written to save Finch's company 10 years prior. It was his calling card, his fingerprint, and his proof of identity all in one. He pressed enter, sending his message into the void, a single prayer launched into the digital heavens. The days that followed were the most agonizing of his life. The silence in the small house was no longer empty. It was filled with a screaming, relentless uncertainty. Had the message been received? Had it been instantly deleted by an automated security system? Or worse, had Finch seen it, remembered him, and simply not cared? Every creak of the floorboards, every car that slowed down on the street, sent a jolt of adrenaline through him. He continued his daytime charade, mowing lawns and fixing routers, his face a mask of placid defeat, while his mind was a storm of hope and fear. He had made his move, his one desperate, audacious gamble. Now, all he could do was wait for the universe to respond. A week passed, then another. The hope began to curdle into a familiar despair. He had been a fool. The world had moved on. Alistair Finch had forgotten him. On the 15th day, as a gray evening rain began to fall, there was a knock on the door. Not the loud, confident knock of a salesman, but a soft, discreet tapping. Elias's heart hammered against his ribs. He opened the door to find a man so utterly ordinary he was practically invisible. He wore a simple gray suit, held a black umbrella, and had the forgettable face of a mid-level accountant. The man did not smile or introduce himself. He simply held out a small, heavy box wrapped in plain brown paper. "A package for you," he said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. He placed the box in Elias's hands and, without another word, turned and walked back into the rain, disappearing as quietly as he had arrived. Elias closed the door, his hands trembling slightly. He tore open the paper. Inside, nestled in thick black foam, was a satellite phone. It was sleek, black, and completely unmarked, with not a single logo or identifying feature. It felt heavy, dense with technology and secrets. As he lifted it from its casing, the screen lit up, and the phone began to ring, its chime a soft, muted tone. He took a breath and answered. For a moment, there was only the faint hiss of a secure, encrypted connection. Then, a voice came through, a voice he had heard only once before, but had never forgotten, deep and resonant like shifting stones. "Mr. Matter Forgotten. Vance," the voice rumbled. "It has been a long time. I remember your name." Elias closed his eyes, a wave of relief so profound it almost buckled his knees. "Mr. Finch," he replied, his own voice steady despite the storm inside him. "I was hoping you would." There was another pause, shorter this time, pregnant with unspoken meaning. Then Alistair Finch said the words that would change everything. "I detest foxes. Tell me everything." The conversation that followed was not one between a desperate man and a powerful benefactor. It was a meeting of minds, a precise and methodical exchange between two men who understood the architecture of power. For over an hour, Elias spoke into the secure satellite phone, his voice calm and steady, as he laid out the intricate web of deceit he had uncovered from his small, lonely room. He presented the digital breadcrumbs, the financial inconsistencies, the behavioral patterns, and the single, flawed transaction ID that had been his first thread of hope. He spoke not with the passion of a victim, but with the dispassionate clarity of an engineer presenting a blueprint. On the other end of the line, Alistair Finch listened in what seemed like absolute silence. But it was not a passive silence. It was the focused, analytical quiet of a grandmaster contemplating a chessboard. He would interject only occasionally, his questions sharp and incisive, cutting through the noise to the core of the issue. The offshore account, is it linked to any of her known assets? The IT employee, what is his psychological profile? Is he motivated by fear or greed? Marcus Thorne, does he have a history of this, or were you his first kill? Each question showed Elias that Finch was not just hearing the story. He was testing the case, searching for any weakness, any vulnerability. When Elias finally finished, the silence on the line stretched for a full minute. Then, Finch spoke, his voice a low, determined rumble. "Mr. Vance, what you have given me is a solid blueprint. Now, we shall build a machine of justice from it. You will have everything you need." What followed was the silent, terrifying activation of Alistair Finch's global network. It was not a loud declaration of war, but a subtle shift in the world's undercurrents, a coordinated movement of ghosts. Elias, from his command center in Maple Creek, was no longer a lone operative. He was the central node in a web of immense power. Finch's resources were deployed with surgical precision. First came the investigators, a team led by a former MI6 station chief, known only as the Curator. They were not men who kicked down doors. They were chameleons who specialized in social engineering and digital infiltration. They were the ones tasked with transforming Elias's digital evidence into irrefutable human proof. Then came the forensic accountants, a team Finch referred to as his surgeons. They could dissect a corporate entity with the same precision a surgeon could a human body, laying bare its secrets, its diseases, and its hidden malignancies. Finally, there was the legal team, an army of sharks led by the formidable Alistair Sterling, a man whose courtroom presence was said to be so intimidating that he had once made a witness confess simply by adjusting his spectacles. The investigation, once a lonely, nocturnal obsession for Elias, exploded into a global, 24-hour operation. The difference in scale was staggering. Elias had found the digital trail of Eleanor's offshore account. Finch's surgeons obtained the bank's internal surveillance footage showing Eleanor herself, poorly disguised in a large hat and sunglasses, making a significant cash deposit on a specific date. Elias had suspected an IT employee had been coerced. Finch's curator located the man, who was living in a state of paranoid fear in a different city. They didn't threaten him. They approached him with an offer: a fully funded relocation to any country of his choice, a new identity, and a job, all in exchange for a single, sworn, videotaped testimony. The man, seeing a lifeline out of the hell Marcus had created for him, broke down and confessed everything, detailing how Marcus had forced him to plant the false evidence, threatening his family if he ever spoke of it. The team dug deeper, unearthing a history on Marcus that even Elias hadn't known. They found a pattern of behavior stretching back to his university days of taking credit for others' work, of ruthlessly undermining rivals, of a pathological need for admiration that was masked by a charismatic facade. He had not become a monster to betray Elias. The monster had simply been waiting for the perfect opportunity. Elias, now connected to this vast machine, felt a purpose he hadn't known since the glory days of Vance Innovations. He was the strategist, the one who understood the psychology of his enemies. He guided the curator's team, predicting how Marcus would react, telling them where Isabella would go to feel safe, advising them on how to approach former employees who were loyal to him but terrified of Marcus. The small bungalow buzzed with a new kind of energy. It was still a secret, still a ghost of a house, but now it was the heart of a global operation, the quiet center of a gathering storm. His days of mowing lawns were not over. The camouflage was more important than ever. He would listen to Karen Peterson complain about the caterers for Marcus's upcoming gala, and would then feed that information to Finch's team, who would use it to place one of their own agents on the catering staff for the event. During their nightly calls, Elias and Finch finalized the plan. A quiet legal battle was out of the question. It lacked the necessary poetic justice and would give Marcus time to marshal his forces and spin the narrative. A man like Marcus Thorne does not fear prison as much as he fears humiliation, Finch had rumbled over the satellite phone. He built his kingdom on a stage, in front of an audience. His downfall must be a public performance. The venue was obvious, the irony too perfect to resist. The company, now arrogantly renamed Thorne Innovations, was hosting a lavish gala to celebrate the 5th anniversary of Marcus's leadership. It was to be the pinnacle of his career, a night to cement his legacy as the visionary who had saved the company. It would, instead, be the night his legacy was incinerated. The final piece of the plan was the weapon itself. Mr. Sterling and his team took the mountains of evidence, the financial charts, the sworn video testimony from the IT employee, the hotel records, the bank surveillance footage, the recovered emails, and forged it into a spear. It was not a legal document, but a short, devastating 10-minute documentary. It was edited with the slick, professional quality of a news expose, a cold, factual, and utterly damning narrative of the entire conspiracy, from Marcus and Isabella's first secret meetings to the final, triumphant transfer of corporate funds into Eleanor's account. The story it told was undeniable, irrefutable, and designed for one purpose: to be publicly displayed and to utterly destroy its subjects. On the eve of the gala, Elias had one last call with Finch. Every agent was in place. The video file was securely in the hands of a technician, another of Finch's people who was running the audio visuals for the event. The net, woven with threads of technology, money, and human intelligence, was now stretched taut. All the spiders were in position. Elias looked out his window at the quiet, unsuspecting suburban street. A world away, a king was preparing to celebrate his reign, completely unaware that his throne was about to be turned into an electric chair. "The net is woven, Mr. Vance," came Finch's final words over the phone. "The spiders are in place. All that is left is for the fly to walk into the parlor." And so we return to that quiet Tuesday afternoon in Maple Creek, the moment the world tilted on its axis. We return to the manicured lawns, the simmering pots of gossip, and the small, unassuming bungalow that the neighborhood had written off as a monument to failure. But now, we see it with new eyes. We know that the peeling paint is a form of camouflage, that the wild garden is a deliberate distraction, and that inside the quiet, dusty rooms, a silent war has been meticulously planned by a ghost who refused to die. Karen Peterson is watering her prize-winning roses, her lips curled in that familiar, condescending smirk as she glances at Elias's home. Her husband Mark is rustling his newspaper on the porch, secure in his suburban kingdom. They are observers, they believe, of another man's pathetic story, entirely unaware that they are about to become the first terrified audience members for its stunning, world-altering final act. When the black sedan arrives, it is not just a car, it is a declaration. It glides onto the street with the silent, lethal grace of a shark entering a koi pond, its polished obsidian finish reflecting the distorted, shocked faces of the Petersons. This vehicle does not belong to their world of minivans and mid-sized sedans. It belongs to a world of absolute power, a diplomatic pouch sent from a shadow kingdom. When Alistair Sterling steps out, he is the very personification of that power. His suit is a whisper of expensive wool, his posture is ramrod straight, and he carries his leather briefcase as if it contains the fates of nations. He doesn't look at the pristine house of the Petersons. His focus is entirely, respectfully, on the cracked pathway leading to Elias's front door. The scene we witnessed at the beginning of our story now plays out with its full, terrifying context. Elias opens the door, not with the shuffle of a broken man, but with the quiet authority of a general receiving his field marshal. The two men exchange a brief, knowing nod, and Sterling follows him inside. The contrast within the bungalow is breathtaking. Mr. Sterling, a man accustomed to the most opulent boardrooms in the world, stands amidst the dusty, Spartan surroundings of Elias's war room. He shows no sign of surprise or distaste. His eyes, sharp and analytical, take in the web of computers and monitors with a look of professional appreciation. The meeting is brutally efficient. Mr. Vance, Sterling begins, his voice a crisp baritone. Mr. Finch sends his compliments. All assets are in place. He opens his briefcase. From it, he produces a slim, encrypted tablet. This is the final cut of the presentation. Please confirm it meets your satisfaction. He also hands over a heavy, sealed envelope containing a single, embossed invitation to the Thorn Innovations Gala. Finally, he unzips a long garment bag he had carried in with him, revealing a tuxedo of such exquisite cut and fabric that it seems to absorb the dim light of the room. Mr. Finch was insistent, Sterling says, a hint of a rare smile touching his lips. He said, and I quote, "A king returning to reclaim his throne must be dressed for the occasion." Elias takes the bag, the weight of the fine wool, a tangible symbol of the power he is about to wield again. He is no longer just a strategist. He is a player, about to step back onto the board. Across the street, the world of the Petersons has been fractured. The foundation of their smug superiority, built on the simple belief that they were better than their neighbor, has crumbled into dust. "Who was that, Mark?" Karen whispers, her voice tight with a new and unfamiliar emotion. Fear, that car, that man. He looked like he could buy and sell this whole street. Mark lowers his paper, his own face pale. I don't know," he stammers. It doesn't make any sense. Their mockery of Elias was safe because he was a known quantity, a failure they could easily categorize and dismiss. This is an unknown. This is a variable that threatens their entire understanding of their world. The deference and respect the visitor showed to Elias is the most terrifying part. It means their narrative is wrong. It means the ghost they have been taunting might actually be a giant, and they have been dancing foolishly at his feet. Acting on pure, panicked instinct, Karen pulls out her phone and dials her cousin. Marcus Thorne is in his penthouse office, overseeing the final seating arrangements for his gala, when the call comes through. He is at the apex of his life, a master of the universe, and he answers the phone with an impatient sigh. "Karen, I'm busy." "What is it?" Her voice comes out in a frantic rush. "Marcus, you won't believe what I just saw. Here, at his house." A car, a black car like something a president would use, and a man in a suit that must have cost more than my mortgage. He just went inside. Marcus lets out a condescending laugh. He is invincible, and the forgotten ghost of Elias Vance is less than a nuisance. Relax, Karen. Seriously. The man is a nobody. He's probably being sued for unpaid debts. Some lawyer came to serve him papers, that's all. You're getting worked up over nothing. Now, I have a gala to prepare for, a celebration of my success. Don't call me again unless his house is actually on fire. He hangs up, a flicker of annoyance on his face. But as he turns back to the seating chart, a slight frown lingers. A presidential car? A $1,000 suit? It's an anomaly, a piece of data that doesn't fit the algorithm of Elias's failure. It's nothing, he tells himself, a random flicker on a dead monitor. And yet, for the first time in 5 years, the name Elias Vance echoes in his mind not as a memory, but as a question. Mr. Sterling's departure is as silent and swift as his arrival. The black sedan glides away, leaving the street cloaked once more in its sleepy, suburban quiet. But the quiet is different now. It is charged, heavy with unspoken questions and a dawning dread. The Petersons stand frozen by their window, staring at the small bungalow, which no longer looks pathetic, but menacingly mysterious. Inside, Elias holds the invitation to the gala in one hand and the heavy garment bag in the other. The final pieces are in his possession. The long years of silence, of patience, of planning in the dark, are over. The visitor has come and gone, and with him, he has brought the signal. The countdown has begun. The grand ballroom of the Corinthia Hotel was a universe of shimmering light and manufactured importance. Crystal chandeliers, each the size of a small car, dripped light onto a sea of 1,000 guests, a carefully curated collection of the city's financial elite, tech moguls, media personalities, and political players. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the low, confident hum of power speaking to power. Champagne flowed like water, and at the front of the room, projected onto a vast screen behind a polished stage, were 2 words in a bold, arrogant font: Thorne Innovations. This was not just a party, it was a coronation, a grand celebration of 5 years of ruthless success, and at its center was the triumphant king, Marcus Thorne. He was in his element, a master of this universe. He moved through the crowd with a practiced, easy grace, his smile dazzling, his handshake firm. He accepted congratulations, clapped powerful men on the back, and shared inside jokes, all while his eyes scanned the room, cataloging the power and influence he had successfully courted. This was the audience he had always craved, the validation he had killed for. At a table of honor near the stage sat Isabella, a vision in emerald silk, playing her role as the adoring queen to perfection. She laughed at the right moments, her head tilted just so, a radiant symbol of his success. But if one looked closely, past the diamonds and the dazzling smile, one might have seen the faint, hairline cracks of a profound emptiness in her eyes. Beside her, their son Leo looked deeply, painfully out of place. The bespoke suit he wore seemed to wear him instead, a costume he hadn't grown into. He picked at his food, his gaze drifting, a young man trapped in a gilded cage built by his own weakness. At precisely 9 o'clock, the lights dimmed, and a spotlight found Marcus as he ascended the stage to a thunderous applause. He stood at the podium, basking in the adoration, a man who had successfully rewritten history. Thank you," he began, his voice smooth and resonant. 5 years ago, we embarked on a new journey. We faced challenges, we made difficult decisions, but we did so with a clear vision and an unwavering commitment to integrity. He spoke of growth, of innovation, of a bright future, every word a polished lie that the room eagerly consumed. He was at the absolute zenith of his stolen life, his arrogance a tangible force. He raised his champagne flute. "So I ask you to join me in a toast," he declared, his voice booming, "to the future, to a new era of—" He never finished the sentence. At that exact moment, at the far end of the ballroom, the grand, ornate double doors swung open. They didn't creak. They opened with a silent, decisive finality, as if pushed by an invisible, inexorable force. The music from the string quartet faltered and died. A wave of murmurs rippled through the back of the room as heads began to turn, a domino effect of curiosity moving toward the stage. Two figures were silhouetted against the bright light of the corridor, their forms dark and indistinct. The room, which moments before had been a cacophony of celebration, began to fall into a deep, expectant silence. Then, the first figure stepped into the light, and a collective gasp went through the room. It was Elias Vance. But it was not the Elias Vance anyone remembered, and certainly not the defeated ghost the rumors described. The man who stood before them was transformed. The bespoke tuxedo, the one delivered by Mr. Sterling, fit him like a second skin. His hair was cut sharp, his face was clean-shaven, revealing the strong jawline that had been hidden for years. But the real transformation was in his eyes. The haunted, broken look was gone, replaced by a gaze of glacial calm and absolute, unnerving focus. He looked like a man who had walked through fire and had come to reclaim the ashes. The whispers grew louder. "Is that Vance? What is he doing here?" But the real shock, the one that sucked the very air from the ballroom, came when the second figure stepped out from behind him. He was an older man, tall and silver-haired, dressed in a simple, impeccably tailored dark suit. He wore no jewelry, no ostentatious watch. He had a face that was not famous, but was etched with an undeniable, almost elemental power. Most in the room had no idea who he was. But a select few, the true titans of industry, the ones who understood the real levers of global power, froze in utter disbelief. A veteran journalist from the Wall Street Journal dropped his notepad. The CEO of the city's largest investment bank audibly gasped his name, a name that was never spoken in public. Finch. That's Alistair Finch. The name shot through the room like a bolt of lightning, a whisper that carried the force of a tidal wave. The mythical ghost of Wall Street, a man who hadn't been photographed in 30 years, was here. And he was standing beside Elias Vance. On the stage, Marcus Thorne froze. The champagne flute slipped from his trembling hand and shattered on the floor, the sound unnaturally loud in the dead silence. The confident smile on his face dissolved, his skin turning a sickly, waxy pale. The confusing, annoying phone call from his cousin Karen exploded in his mind, no longer an anomaly but a dire prophecy just fulfilled. He stared at the two figures, and his entire world, the one he had so carefully constructed on a foundation of lies, began to violently disintegrate. At her table, Isabella's perfectly constructed poise collapsed. Her hand flew to her necklace, her breath catching in her throat. She saw the ghost of the man she had betrayed, now returned as an avenging angel, and beside him stood a force of nature she knew they could not fight. All the silk and diamonds in the world could not protect her now. And Leo, poor Leo, visibly flinched and shrank into his chair, his face a mask of pure terror. He looked at his father, truly saw him for the first time in 5 years, and the full, crushing weight of his catastrophic mistake slammed into him. Elias said nothing. Finch said nothing. They didn't need to. Their presence alone was a declaration of war. They began to walk, their pace unhurried, their path cutting straight through the center of the ballroom. The sea of glittering guests parted before them as if they were lepers or gods. Every eye was locked on them. The celebration was over. The air crackled with a new, terrible energy. They walked past the table where Isabella and Leo sat like statues in a tragedy, their destination clear. They were walking toward the stage, toward the king, who now stood utterly alone under the spotlight, a fraud about to be exposed on the grandest stage he had ever coveted. The reckoning had arrived. The walk to the stage was the longest of Marcus Thorne's life. As Elias and Alistair Finch approached, the space around the stage cleared, creating a sterile, silent perimeter, a quarantine zone around a collapsing star. Marcus, trapped in the spotlight's glare, sputtered into the microphone, his voice a pathetic squeak. "Security, get these men, get them out of here." But the security guards, large men in dark suits, who had been placed by Finch's team, remained perfectly still, their faces impassive. They were not there to protect him, they were there to contain him. Alistair Finch reached the stage first, ascending the small set of stairs with the unhurried grace of a man who owned not just the room, but the very ground it was built on. He did not look at Marcus. He walked directly to the podium, gently took the microphone from its stand, and turned to face the stunned, silent audience. His voice, when he spoke, was not loud, but it filled the cavernous ballroom with an authority that was absolute. "Ladies and gentlemen," Finch began, his voice a low, gravelly rumble, "my sincerest apologies for this interruption. It appears there has been a clerical error in tonight's presentation. We are here to correct the record." He gave a single, almost imperceptible nod towards the audio-visual booth at the back of the room. On the massive screen behind him, the arrogant Thorn Innovations logo flickered once, then vanished. It was replaced by a simple, stark white title card against a black background. The architecture of a lie. A quiet, ominous piano score began to play, and the room, if possible, grew even quieter. The 10-minute film that followed was not a passionate accusation. It was a cold, clinical, and systematic execution. It began with a photograph of Elias, Marcus, and Isabella, taken years ago on a boat, all of them smiling, a snapshot of a time of trust and friendship. The image then dissolved into a timeline. Hotel receipts from discreet boutique hotels, airline manifests for flights to Bermuda, credit card statements, all laid out with dates and times, creating an undeniable, overlapping chronicle of Marcus and Isabella's affair, which had begun more than a year before the betrayal. In the audience, the gasps were audible. At her table, Isabella made a small, wounded sound as hundreds of eyes, once full of admiration, now turned to her with looks of pity and disgust. The camera flashes, which she had once courted, now felt like physical blows. The documentary seamlessly transitioned from personal betrayal to corporate treason. The screen split, showing two documents side by side. The original, complex financial report for Project Chimera, and the simplified, doctored version Marcus had presented to the board. An elegant animation highlighted the discrepancies, the altered numbers glowing a blood red, the fabricated transaction IDs circled and flagged as impossible. Then, a new face appeared on screen. A pale, nervous-looking man in his late 30s. The caption identified him as John Riley, former senior systems analyst at Vance Innovations. It was his sworn, videotaped testimony. He looked directly into the camera, his voice shaking but clear, and confessed everything. He described how Marcus Thorn had called him into his office, how he had threatened his wife and children, forcing him to create the false data trails. "He destroyed a good man," Riley said, tears welling in his eyes. "He threatened my family. I've been living in fear for 5 years, but I can't be silent anymore." On the stage, a strangled noise escaped Marcus's throat. This was the ghost he thought he had buried, now resurrected on a 20-foot screen, testifying to his crimes. His professional reputation, his image as the brilliant corporate savior, was being atomized in real time. The final act of the film was the money trail. The complex web of shell companies and wire transfers was simplified into a single, devastating animation. The audience watched a river of gold flow from the company's accounts, through a labyrinth of phantom corporations, and into a final destination, a private bank in the Cayman Islands. And then, the film showed the bank's security footage. It was grainy, but the image was unmistakable. A woman in a large hat and sunglasses, making a series of substantial cash deposits. The video then cut to a high-resolution photograph of the same woman at a charity event a few weeks later, smiling for the cameras. The woman was Eleanor DeWitt, Isabella's mother. The web was complete. The conspiracy was laid bare, not as an accusation, but as an undeniable, documented fact. The film ended not with a crescendo, but with a quiet, powerful image, the original Vance Innovations logo, the one Elias had designed in his garage years ago. Then, the screen went black. For 10 full seconds, the only sound in the Corinthia Grand Ballroom was the quiet hum of the air conditioning. It was a silence so profound, so heavy with shock and disgust, that it felt like the end of the world. Then, the storm broke. A roar of conversation, of outrage, erupted. The journalists, no longer guests but predators who had just been thrown a feast, surged forward, shouting questions, their cameras flashing in a relentless, blinding strobe. At her table, Isabella finally broke, burying her face in her hands as a sob tore through her. Leo was catatonic, his face a ghostly white, staring into nothingness, the full weight of his complicity crushing him. On the stage, Marcus Thorne, the man of the hour, stood completely and utterly broken. His face was a slack, vacant mask of horror. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. He was a king standing naked on his throne, his empire revealed to be nothing but a fantasy. As the chaos mounted, two of Finch's security men walked calmly onto the stage and stood on either side of him. The police, who had been waiting discreetly in the hotel lobby, were on their way. And throughout it all, Elias Vance had not moved. He stood at the edge of the stage, a silent, motionless sentinel. He did not smile. He did not show a flicker of triumph or glee. His face was a mask of somber, grim satisfaction. His victory was not in the screams of the media or the downfall of his enemies. It was in the cold, hard silence that had followed the presentation, the moment when the truth, his truth, had finally been heard and understood. As the chaos swirled around him, his eyes moved past the pathetic figure of Marcus, past the weeping form of Isabella, and settled on his son. He looked at the shattered young man cowering at the table of honor, and for the first time that night, an emotion crossed Elias's face. It was not anger. It was not hatred. It was a deep, profound, and heartbreaking pity. The reckoning was over. The truth had been spoken. And now, all that was left was to survey the ruins. The chaos that erupted in the Corinthia ballroom was the sound of a universe collapsing. It was the frantic, feeding frenzy of the media, the panicked calls of investors, and the horrified whispers of a social class witnessing a public execution. Marcus Thorne was led away, not in handcuffs at first, but flanked by Finch's discreet security, his face a hollow mask of disbelief. He was a king being escorted from his own coronation to the gallows. Isabella was swallowed by a storm of camera flashes. Her name, once a symbol of elegance, now the headline of a sordid scandal. Their empire of lies, so carefully constructed over 5 long years, had been demolished in 10 perfect, brutal minutes. The aftermath was not a war, but a simple, cold, and efficient cleanup. Marcus and Eleanor faced a mountain of irrefutable evidence. Their trials were swift. They were sentenced to long years in federal prison, stripped of every stolen asset, their names erased from the ledgers of power and consigned to the annals of corporate crime. Isabella, while not facing criminal charges, received a sentence of a different kind. The social world she had worshipped cast her out with a breathtaking cruelty. Her friends no longer answered her calls. Her invitations ceased to arrive. She was forced to sell her jewels and clothes, eventually moving to a small, anonymous apartment in a city that no longer saw her. For a woman whose entire existence was built on being seen, she was condemned to the hell of invisibility. Elias, with the full backing of Alistair Finch and a now loyal board of directors, retook his position as CEO of the company that still bore his name. Vance Innovations was reborn, but the man who returned to the corner office was not the same one who had left it. The naive trust in his eyes had been replaced by a quiet, discerning wisdom. He was a man who now understood the high cost of betrayal and the true value of integrity. His first act was not one of revenge, but of restoration. He rehired employees Marcus had fired, restored the company's ethical mission, and quietly compensated those who had been harmed by the previous regime, including a full, anonymous scholarship for the children of John Riley, the IT employee who had bravely testified. He was building again, not just with code and circuits, but with a renewed purpose. Months later, he finally went to find his son. Leo had disappeared after the gala, shamed into self-imposed exile. Elias found him working for a small landscaping company in a town 100 miles away. He was thinner, his face etched with a guilt that seemed to have aged him a decade. He was loading bags of soil into a truck when he saw Elias, and he froze, looking like a cornered animal. They stood in silence for a long moment, the space between them filled with the ghosts of their past. Elias didn't shout. He didn't recriminate. He simply looked at his son, the boy he had raised, and saw the wreckage of a life. "I came to see how you were," Elias said, his voice even. Leo finally broke, the tears he had been holding back for months streaming down his face. "I'm sorry," he whispered, the words choked with shame. "Dad, I am so sorry." Elias nodded slowly. "I know," he said. He did not offer an easy absolution. He knew that forgiveness was not a gift he could bestow, but something Leo had to find for himself. Redemption isn't given, Leo. It's built, one honest day at a time. The work is hard, but the ground is there if you ever decide you want to start building again. He left his son there, amidst the dirt and the flowers, offering not a pardon, but a path. The last place he had to visit was the small bungalow in Maple Creek. It was time to finally leave the chrysalis. As he was packing the last of his equipment, he found Alistair Finch waiting for him, standing in the sparse living room and looking out the window. "It's a quiet place," Finch said, his back to Elias. "A good place to think." "It served its purpose," Elias replied, taping up the final box. Finch turned, his gaze profound. "I never told you the full reason why I helped you, Elias," he said. "The debt of integrity was only part of it. It runs deeper." He told a story of a time long ago, of his own son, Daniel, a brilliant, passionate young physicist who saw the world in patterns and possibilities. Daniel Finch had died in a tragic lab accident in his late 20s. "He was my only child," Alistair said, his voice thick with a carefully controlled grief. "And his best friend, his roommate at Stanford, the only person he said was as smart as he was you. The initial coding for the algorithm that became the bedrock of Vance Innovations. You two wrote it together on a pizza box in your dorm room. He believed in you more than anyone." Suddenly, everything clicked into place. The unwavering support, the immense resources, the almost paternal way Finch had guided him. It wasn't for a past business favor. Alistair Finch, in helping Elias, was honoring the ghost of his own son. He was completing Daniel's legacy. "When your message came through," Finch continued, "I saw a chance to fulfill a promise I made to my boy on his deathbed, that his dreams wouldn't die with him. But I had to be sure you were still the man he believed you to be. The man in the mansion, the titan of industry. I wasn't so sure about him, but the man in this small house, the one who was stripped of everything but his own mind and his will to fight for the truth, that was the man my son called his brother. The small house was not a prison. It had been a crucible, a place that had burned away all the vanity and hubris, leaving only the core of the man he was meant to be." As Elias finally drove away from Maple Creek, he glanced in his rearview mirror. A new family was already looking at the house. Next door, a for sale sign was staked into the Petersons' perfectly manicured lawn. They had sold their home a week after the gala, unable to bear the shame or the quiet, knowing glances from the rest of the neighborhood. Elias faced the open road, the future of his company secure, the path for his son cleared, and the legacy of a lost friend finally honored. He thought of the long, silent years of planning, of the whispers and the scorn he had endured, and a final, quiet truth settled over him. Never underestimate the silence of a person who has endured for too long, because when they finally decide to speak, their words will not be mere sounds, but a storm capable of leveling an empire. Thank you for listening. We will see you in the next story from GIA.iotus.